The city pulsed with life. Bright sunlight spilled onto the bustling street, glinting off skyscraper windows and dancing on the hoods of crawling taxis. Pedestrians navigated the chaos, their voices blending into a chorus of honking horns, the rhythmic clatter of heels on pavement, and the melodic calls of street vendors hawking roasted chestnuts and fresh coffee. It was a typical urban symphony, alive with energy and motion. Among the throng, a man moved with a quiet confidence that belied his casual appearance. Alex Stone, dressed in a simple black hoodie and aviator sunglasses, walked unrecognized through the maze of people. Known to the world as a billionaire philanthropist, former wrestling champion, and Hollywood A-lister, Alex was a titan in every sense of the word. But here, on this sunlit street, he was just another face in the crowd, a fleeting moment of anonymity he savored. He stopped at the corner near a quaint cafe. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the city air as Alex leaned against a lamppost, pulling his phone from his pocket. He scrolled absently, letting the city's hum envelop him, his powerful frame relaxed yet alert, a predator camouflaged in plain sight. Across the street, another figure prowled with a different energy. Officer Blake Carter patrolled the sidewalks with a swagger that seemed almost rehearsed. His posture screamed authority, his narrowed eyes scanning for anything or anyone that didn't belong. Blake, notorious for his heavy-handed tactics and prejudiced assumptions, prided himself on keeping his streets in order. To him, the uniform was not just a badge of duty, but a symbol of control. Blake's gaze landed on Alex. Instinctively, his mind began sorting through its catalogue of biases. The hoodie, the sunglasses, the posture, it all screamed suspicious to him. "What's this guy up to?" Blake muttered under his breath, tightening his grip on his baton. Blake Carter strode across the street, his boots striking the asphalt with deliberate weight. His gaze never left Alex Stone, his mind racing with assumptions. To Blake, the sight of a man leaning casually against a lamppost, dressed in a hoodie and sunglasses, didn't sit right. It was the posture, the confidence, the air of detachment. It all set off alarms in his head. "Doesn't look like he belongs," he muttered, his voice dripping with the certainty of someone who thought he could read people at a glance. Blake approached without hesitation, his badge gleaming in the sunlight like an unspoken threat. As he drew nearer, the chatter of the street seemed to dim, leaving only the sound of his boots and the faint hum of a distant car horn. He stopped a few feet away from Alex, his presence heavy and invasive. "You!" Blake barked, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. "What are you doing here?" Alex looked up slowly, his calm demeanor unshaken by the sudden confrontation. Behind the sunglasses, his eyes narrowed slightly, assessing the man in front of him. He didn't flinch, didn't shift his weight or look away. Instead, he let a moment of silence pass, the tension hanging between them like a taut wire. "I'm just waiting here," Alex replied evenly, his tone polite but firm. "Is that a problem?" Blake's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who, in his mind, looked out of place. His eyes swept over Alex again, searching for something, anything to justify his suspicion. The hoodie, the sunglasses, the way he stood there as if he owned the street. "This isn't a place to loiter," Blake snapped. "You can't just stand around here like you're up to something." Alex tilted his head slightly, a faint hint of a smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Loitering?" he repeated, his voice carrying a note of incredulity. "I wasn't aware standing still was a crime." The response only fueled Blake's irritation. He stepped closer, his hand resting on the baton at his hip, the weight of his authority pressing down on the space between them. "Don't get smart with me," he growled. "I'm telling you to move along. Now." For a moment, Alex said nothing. He simply stood there, his imposing frame as immovable as a mountain. Then, with a deliberate slowness, he pulled down his sunglasses, revealing sharp eyes that seemed to cut through Blake like glass. "I'm not breaking any laws," Alex said, his voice calm but with an edge that hinted at something deeper. "I have every right to stand here, just like everyone else." The words landed like a challenge, and Blake could feel his frustration boiling over. Around them, a few pedestrians slowed their pace, sensing the tension. A street vendor glanced over, his hands hesitating over a stack of napkins. The air seemed to shift, the bustling energy of the street giving way to a charged silence. Blake's grip on his baton tightened. He wasn't about to let this man, whoever he thought he was, undermine his authority. But as he stared into Alex's unyielding gaze, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. Something about this wasn't right, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Blake's nostrils flared as he took a step closer, his shadow falling over Alex like a dark cloud. The officer's frustration bubbled just beneath the surface, barely contained. He had dealt with plenty of people who tried to outwit him, but something about Alex's calm defiance, his unwavering composure, pushed all the wrong buttons. "What's your deal, huh?" Blake barked, his voice rising above the background chatter of the street. "You think you can just stand here looking shady and I'm supposed to ignore it?" Alex's lips tightened, though his expression remained composed. He glanced briefly at the people starting to slow their pace, their curiosity piqued by the rising tension. "Looking shady?" he repeated, his voice steady. "I'm just standing here like anyone else, officer. If that's a problem, I'd like to know why." Blake's face darkened. To him, Alex's calm tone wasn't respectful. It was dismissive, even mocking. "Don't play games with me," Blake snarled, stepping so close now that the air between them felt suffocating. "You're not just standing, you're loitering. And when I tell you to move, you move." Alex tilted his head slightly, his calm eyes meeting Blake's furious glare. "Is that a law?" he asked, his tone still unshaken. "Or just your interpretation of one?" The question struck Blake like a slap. His grip on the baton at his belt tightened until his knuckles turned white. For a moment he glanced around, realizing that the growing crowd was now fully focused on them. Their phones were out, the faint glint of camera lenses catching the sunlight as they recorded every word, every movement. "You're resisting," Blake spat, his voice trembling with frustration as much as anger. "You're making this harder than it has to be." "Resisting what?" Alex asked evenly, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Standing my ground? Telling you I haven't done anything wrong?" The words hung in the air, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. A murmur rippled through the small crowd, a mix of confusion and discomfort. To them, it was clear Alex wasn't causing trouble, but Blake's actions told a different story. Blake's patience snapped. "I'm warning you," he growled, his voice low and threatening, the baton now fully in his hand. "You're testing my limits." Alex didn't flinch. Instead, he stood taller, his shoulders squared, the quiet authority in his presence magnified. "I'm not testing anything," he said firmly. "I'm exercising my right to be here, the same as anyone else. If you can't respect that, then maybe it's you who shouldn't be here." The challenge in Alex's words was unmistakable, and for a split second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Blake's face. But it was quickly replaced by rage, his pride unable to accept the idea of backing down. The air between them grew heavier, each second charged with tension as the crowd swelled around the scene. A few murmurs floated through the onlookers, but most people stood silent, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Blake Carter had reached his breaking point. His face was flushed, his breathing ragged, and his grip on the baton was no longer just a show of authority. It was a weapon in his hand. "Enough of this," he growled, the fury in his voice barely contained. In one swift motion, Blake raised the baton and swung it down toward Alex Stone's arm. The sharp crack of the impact reverberated through the street, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd like a lightning strike. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers as the force of the strike echoed in their ears. Alex staggered back a step, his left arm instinctively moving to absorb the blow. For a moment, his expression remained unreadable, his face a mask of calm even as the sting of the strike pulsed through him. Then, with deliberate slowness, he straightened to his full height. He reached up and removed his sunglasses, revealing a pair of piercing, steely eyes that locked onto Blake like a predator assessing its prey. His previously relaxed demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet, controlled anger that radiated power and resolve. Blake faltered, taking a half step back as the reality of Alex's presence became impossible to ignore. The man standing before him was no ordinary passerby. He was a force of nature, a mountain that had chosen not to move. Around them, the crowd began to react. Phones were raised, their cameras capturing every detail. Gasps turned to murmurs, and the murmurs grew louder. "Did you see that?" someone whispered. "He just hit him." "What's going on here?" another voice called out, louder this time. The tone carried both shock and outrage. Alex's voice cut through the noise, calm yet deadly serious. "That was a mistake," he said, his tone measured but with an edge that hinted at something far more dangerous beneath the surface. Blake's jaw tightened, his pride refusing to let him back down. "Don't you tell me what's a mistake," he barked, though his voice trembled slightly. Alex took a step forward, closing the distance between them. He didn't need to raise his voice. The intensity in his eyes did all the talking. "You've already lost control," he said, his words as sharp as a blade. "And now the world is watching." The crowd grew restless, their murmurs turning into open discussion as they realized the gravity of what had just happened. The phones in their hands weren't just spectators, they were witnesses, recording evidence of the officer's actions. Blake glanced around, the weight of the stairs pressing down on him. His chest heaved as anger and fear battled for control. But Alex didn't give him the chance to recover. He stepped closer, his towering frame now casting a shadow over the trembling officer. Blake's knuckles whitened as his grip tightened on the baton. Fueled by frustration and a desperate need to reassert his authority, he lunged forward, swinging wildly at Alex. The strike was reckless, a blur of anger rather than precision. But Alex Stone was no ordinary man. Years of training, discipline, and instinct kicked in like a second nature. With a speed that seemed almost supernatural, Alex's hand shot up and caught the baton mid-swing, his grip firm and unyielding. The crowd collectively gasped as the metallic clang of resistance rang out, loud and clear, like a bell marking the end of Blake's dominance. Blake froze, his momentum stolen. His eyes widened in disbelief as Alex stood before him, unshaken, holding the baton with ease. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The street, once alive with tension, now buzzed with a different energy, a realization that the balance of power had shifted. With a calculated movement, Alex wrenched the baton from Blake's grasp. The officer stumbled back, his footing unsteady, his face a mask of shock and humiliation. Weaponless and exposed, Blake felt the weight of the moment bearing down on him. The crowd, emboldened by Alex's calm defiance, erupted into cheers. "That's what he gets!" someone shouted. Another voice joined in. "You can't just bully people!" The onlookers, who had moments ago watched in stunned silence, now rallied behind Alex, their voices rising like a wave crashing against Blake's crumbling authority. Blake's gaze darted between Alex and the crowd, panic creeping into his expression. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His bravado had evaporated, replaced by the stark reality of his defeat. Alex stepped forward, the baton still in his hand. His imposing frame seemed to grow taller, his presence more commanding. Leaning in slightly, his voice dropped to a low, measured growl, every syllable laced with quiet menace. "You just made a big mistake," Alex said, his words cutting through the cheers like a blade. "I suggest you think very carefully before taking this any further." Blake swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as fear flickered across his face. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, their judgment palpable. The phones still pointed in his direction recorded every detail, his trembling hands, his flushed cheeks, the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Alex didn't move, didn't raise his voice, but the sheer intensity of his presence spoke volumes. His warning wasn't just a threat, it was a statement of fact, a reminder that he wasn't someone to be trifled with. The crowd's cheers grew louder, a roar of approval and solidarity that seemed to echo down the entire street. Some clapped, others whistled, and a few even chanted, "Justice! Justice!" The energy was electric, the people rallying around Alex as a symbol of defiance against abuse of power. Blake, humiliated and outmatched, took another step back, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. But there was none. The crowd's cheers surged louder, their energy electrifying the street as Blake Carter stood frozen, his confidence shattered. Alex Stone remained calm and composed, the baton now dangling from his hand, a symbol of his unshakable resolve. From the edge of the crowd, the distant wail of approaching sirens sliced through the air. The tension that had begun to simmer down reignited as two patrol cars screeched to a halt at the curb. Doors flew open, and two officers emerged, their expressions serious as they surveyed the scene. Officer Mark, a young, sharp-eyed recruit, was the first to notice the throng of people, their phones raised like an army of witnesses. His older, more experienced partner, Officer Daniels, strode forward with a commanding presence, his hand resting cautiously on his holstered weapon as his gaze locked onto the towering figure of Alex Stone and the disheveled Blake. "What's going on here?" Daniels barked, his tone demanding order amidst the chaos. The crowd murmured, some pointing toward Blake while others gestured at Alex, their voices a cacophony of fragmented explanations. Mark moved closer, his eyes narrowing as he got a clearer look at Alex. His heart skipped a beat, recognition dawning like a bolt of lightning. He nudged Daniels urgently, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Wait, isn't that Alex Stone?" "The Alex Stone?" Daniels frowned, confused by his partner's excitement. "Who?" Mark leaned in, his voice hushed but insistent. "The billionaire, the actor, the guy who's practically a living legend." Daniels' eyes widened as he took another look at Alex, his towering frame, unmistakable charisma, and the piercing intensity in his gaze. It all clicked. His breath hitched, and the seriousness of the situation hit him like a freight train. Meanwhile, Blake's face had gone pale. He followed the whispered exchange between Mark and Daniels, his mind racing. Recognition finally dawned, and the weight of his actions crashed down on him. He hadn't just swung at an ordinary civilian, he had attacked one of the most respected and recognizable men in the world. Daniels straightened, his expression hardening as he turned to Blake. His voice was cold and sharp, slicing through the din of the crowd. "Carter, what the hell is going on here?" Blake stammered, his words fumbling as he tried to explain. I thought... I didn't know..." "You didn't know," Daniels interrupted, his tone filled with scorn. "You didn't bother to find out, did you?" The crowd quieted, their attention fully on the escalating drama. Daniels stepped closer to Blake, his presence radiating authority. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice firm. "Hand over your baton and step away. Now." Blake hesitated, his pride warring with his growing sense of dread. The judgmental stares of the crowd, the cameras capturing every moment, and the sheer magnitude of his mistake bore down on him. Reluctantly, he released a shuddering breath and stepped back, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Daniels turned to Alex, his tone shifting to one of respect. "Mr. Stone, are you all right? I assure you this behavior will not go unchecked." Alex's gaze didn't waver. "It's not me you should be worried about," he said calmly, nodding toward the crowd. "It's them. They've seen everything." Daniels nodded solemnly, the weight of the situation pressing on him. Behind him, Mark stood in awe, his earlier excitement tempered by the gravity of what had unfolded. The tension in the air lingered as Officer Daniels turned to the gathered crowd. His authoritative voice cut through the murmurs and whispers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone steady but heavy with remorse. "I want to apologize on behalf of this department for what you've witnessed here today. I assure you, this incident will be investigated thoroughly, and appropriate action will be taken." The crowd shifted, their expressions a mix of anger and relief. The sound of murmured agreements rippled through the gathering, though their phones remained fixed on the scene, documenting every word and gesture. Behind Daniels, Blake Carter, pale and visibly shaken, finally found his voice. "Wait," he stammered, stepping forward, his tone desperate. "I didn't know who he was. I thought he was just..." Daniels snapped his head toward Blake, his eyes flashing with uncontained fury. "That's no excuse," he barked, cutting Blake off mid-sentence. The sharpness of his words silenced the officer instantly. "It doesn't matter who he is. It's your job to serve and protect, not to harass and assault people based on your own assumptions." Blake's mouth opened as if to protest again, but no words came. The crowd's disapproving murmurs grew louder, a tide of voices condemning his behavior. Daniels didn't wait for further argument. He turned to Blake with a glare that could melt steel. "Hand over your badge and baton," he ordered firmly, his voice echoing with finality. Blake hesitated, his pride warring with the undeniable reality of the situation. Slowly, with trembling hands, he unpinned his badge and unbuckled his baton holster. As he handed them over, the symbolic weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices a collective expression of approval and relief. The sound was deafening, a wave of vindication that swept through the street. Some clapped, others whistled, and a few even chanted, "Justice! Justice!" The energy was electric, and the tide had turned decisively in Alex Stone's favor. Alex stood amidst the noise, his presence calm and composed as always. He glanced at the crowd, his sharp eyes scanning the sea of faces. Then, raising a hand for quiet, he stepped forward. The cheers gradually subsided, the crowd's attention drawn fully to him. "Thank you," Alex began, his deep, resonant voice carrying over the street. "Thank you for standing here today. Thank you for speaking up, for recording what happened, and for showing that injustice has no place in our world." The crowd was silent now, hanging on his every word. Alex's tone was firm but filled with sincerity, his words cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "This isn't about who I am," he continued, gesturing toward himself. "It's about making sure no one has to go through this kind of treatment. Ever. Whether you're rich or poor, famous or unknown, no one deserves to be judged, mistreated, or silenced because of someone else's prejudice." The crowd nodded, their expressions a mix of admiration and determination. Alex's gaze swept over the group, his eyes settling on the phones still recording. "The truth matters," he said. "What you've captured here today, what you've witnessed, it's a reminder that we all have a voice. And when we use it together, we can demand accountability. We can demand change." The crowd began to disperse, their energy shifting from the heated tension of confrontation to a quiet admiration for what had just transpired. Conversations filled the air as people reflected on the moment, some still recording their final clips, others sharing their thoughts with strangers who now felt like allies. Alex Stone, standing tall and resolute, prepared to step away from the scene. He took a deep breath, letting the echoes of applause settle as he turned toward the street. Just as he began to walk, a small voice called out from the edge of the crowd, "Mr. Stone?" Alex paused and turned, his sharp gaze softening as he saw a young boy no older than 10 clutching a sketchbook against his chest. The boy's wide eyes were filled with a mixture of awe and nervous excitement. "Yes?" Alex said, his tone gentle. The boy hesitated, glancing down at his sketchbook as if summoning the courage to speak. Can I have your autograph, please?" His voice trembled slightly, but his determination shone through. Alex's expression melted into a warm smile. He crouched down to meet the boy's gaze, making himself approachable despite his towering frame. "Of course," he said, his voice filled with kindness. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy replied, his cheeks flushing with excitement as he handed over the sketchbook and a pen. As Alex signed his name with a flourish, he glanced up at Ethan. "You know, Ethan," he said, "standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's people like you, brave enough to ask questions and speak out, who make the world a better place." Ethan's eyes sparkled, his grip on the sketchbook tightening as Alex handed it back. "Thank you, Mr. Stone," he said, his voice now filled with confidence. At that moment, a woman stepped forward from the crowd. Ethan's mother, her face glowing with gratitude, placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "Thank you," she said to Alex, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For standing up today. For showing people what real courage looks like. You've inspired so many of us, especially him." Alex nodded, his gaze meeting hers with understanding. "It's not just about me," he replied. "It's about all of us standing together, making sure no one faces injustice alone." As the echoes of Alex Stone's powerful stand fade into the golden horizon, one question remains. What would you do if you were there? Did this story stir something within you, a sense of injustice, hope, or even inspiration? If you felt moved by Alex's courage, take a moment to reflect. Imagine being in the crowd, witnessing that moment of change. Would you stand up? Would you capture the truth? Now, it's your turn to let us know what you think. What resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Your insights not only help us grow, but also spark meaningful conversations that matter. And if this story touched your heart, why not share it with others? Like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories of bravery, resilience, and inspiration to share, and we'd love for you to join us on this journey. Thank you for being here, for caring, and for making a difference just by listening. Wishing you a day filled with courage, inspiration, and a little bit of magic. See you in the next story.